Christian Miller, presented by our good friends at the Good Feet Store, America's art support experts. We will now head on over to the Miller's Edge guest line, where we will be joined by my good friend Charlie Potter of Bama Online and On3 Sports. Charlie, how are you this morning?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining. We're going to get this started off. I know tonight's a big night with the NBA draft coming up, and one of our most notable players, Brandon Miller, will be attending that, and he's likely to be the number 2 overall pick to the Charlotte Hornets. What are your overall thoughts there? Do you see that happening? And just maybe even rewind and just, his career at Alabama. I know it was, just 1 year, but his impact that he had on the court while he was here with the Crimson Tide.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens tonight. I know Woj, who, if you talk about basketball news in the NBA, Woj is kind of the authority. He seemed to think that, Brandon had kind of solidified himself as that number 2 pick. Now we've seen, Shams, who works for The Athletic and for Stadium, kind of talk about Scoot Henderson at number 2. So there's going to be some drama, I think, after Victor goes number 1. I don't think there's going to be any surprise at number 1 with the Spurs. But number 2 could be interesting because it's either going to be, Brandon Miller or Scoot Henderson, and then beyond that you have the Trailblazers picking 3rd. But no, I mean, for Brandon Miller, I think, the further we get away from it, the more an argument can be made that, he had the best single season in Alabama basketball history. He's a guy that came in with a highly touted class, that Nate Oates and his staff were able to put together. And, Brandon's a guy that really just took off from the jump. When they had their foreign tour, he started to make some noise, and he didn't really slow down. He had a pretty quiet postseason. I know he's dealing with an injury, but the way that he was able to score and then affect the game in other ways when teams try to take him away, it just seemed like he didn't really have an off night whenever he was healthy. So, he's someone that, in addition to what he dealt with off the court, handled himself really well and dealt with a lot of pressure. I think that'll suit him well the next level. And, whoever picks him, whether it's Charlotte or Portland or the team trades up, they're going to get not only a good player, but a good person.
Charlie Potter's our guest here on the Miller's Edge. And Charlie, you talk about the year Brandon had for the Alabama Crimson Tide, but there's so many others that were really good basketball players that are going in the draft early. What have you heard about them? And some people felt like they made a bad decision, maybe should have stayed. But as far as the other guys that opted to go to the NBA draft, what are you hearing about them?
Yeah, there's 2 more. Noah Clowney is a guy that it wasn't as highly touted coming out of high school as Brandon Miller, but he's a guy that impressed as soon as he stepped on campus. We saw him step into the starting lineup early on in the season and never really relinquished that role. And he's a guy that whenever he's able to be consistent from 3, he's a really dangerous player because he has side, can play in the low post, but can kick out and make shots from deep. So he's a guy that's been projected anywhere from late lottery to late first. It's going to be interesting to see where he falls. I'd imagine somewhere, in the early 20s makes sense right now, but you never know how this thing's going to shake out. The draft is always a fascinating thing to watch unfold. But I think, Noah's a young guy, and he's going to continue to develop. And I think, teams in the NBA, they draft on that upside, especially with a guy, that's really young. And I think that that's going to be really attractive to a lot of teams. So, beyond that, the only other one is Charles Bediako, and I think that was a surprise to some, even to Alabama. I think some people were left kind of scratching their head a little bit because, while it makes sense for these guys to test the NBA draft waters and get that feedback, they have the opportunity to come back to school. And a lot of people, I think, had expected Bediako to come back. And if he had, with what Nate Oates and his staff have put together from a recruiting and transfer portal standpoint, Alabama could be really dangerous this season, but he chose to stay in the draft. And you're looking at mock drafts, which I know aren't the gospel. I looked at, I think, 8, 9, 10 of them, for a roundup this week, and he was only projected to go late second, one of them. The rest he was undrafted. So, unless he was promised something from the team late, we'll see what happens. But it could be a situation where Alabama only has 2 players drafted later tonight. with Bediako looking to sign on with a team with a two-way contract or something like that. So those are the only two, and it's kind of a wide range when you look at the three that are in the draft. But if all three are selected, it'll be a big night for Alabama, no doubt.
Charlie, you mentioned recruiting in the transfer portal, and that's exactly where I wanted to go next. I looked at the basketball roster before I think Mark Sears and Javon Quinterly announced they were coming back. I think there was maybe like 6 guys on the roster that were listed online. Now with those guys, it's around 8. But we've seen numerous commits in the past couple of days for Alabama basketball. Could you talk a little bit about that, the guys that have recently committed or who they expect to commit, and what that means for this basketball program that was looking a little slim not too long ago?
Yeah, I think the language there is important because you said expect to commit, because there was big news a week ago that Grant Nelson, the transfer from North Dakota State, was expected to commit to Alabama, but he hasn't announced anything publicly. So when we've kind of put out our roster tracker, or when people have asked about numbers, I haven't included him yet because he hasn't officially pulled the trigger there. But you look at what they were able to add yesterday, and a guy like Jaren Stevenson, who was a 2024 prospect, but a top 20 player nationally. He gives them some front court help, which they desperately need with Bediako turning pro. He reclassified to the 2023 class, so he'll be arriving on campus a year early. So a young guy that still has room to grow, but is an elite prospect when you look at what he's rated from the recruiting services. If they get both those guys on campus, that certainly lessens the blow of losing a guy like Bediako, who was kind of the anchor of that defense. And, when you look at what he was able to do from the defensive end, Alabama will miss that sorely. So I think when you look at what they have coming in so far, and this is excluding Grant Nelson, they have 6 players coming in, so 6 newcomers, and that's to go along with 5 returning players. And one of those is technically a newcomer, and Davin Cosby, who enrolled in January but didn't play, just kind of redshirted. So they really only have 4 guys with experience coming back. So it's going to be a pretty much new look roster. But they've went out, and whether it's via the high school ranks or the transfer portal, they went out and tried to solidify this roster. And I think an argument can be made, at least on paper, talking right here in late June, that this could be a deeper roster just in terms of what they are able to do from an experience standpoint. So it'll be really fascinating to see how it plays out and what this team looks like come the season.
Charlie Potter, Bama Online and On 3 Sports, is our guest here on the Miller's Edge on the Tide 100.9. Let's switch gears and talk football. And I know yesterday Christian and I were talking about recruiting and about Julian Singh winning the MVP at the Elite 11. Of course, I'm old school, kind of like Nick Saban said, well, that doesn't mean he's going to come in and be the next Heisman Trophy winning quarterback at Alabama, but he looks really good if you just look at just throwing against air. Let's talk about the football team, some of the recruiting, the guys that now are on campus, in the workouts, in summer school. What are you hearing that some of the guys that are impressing and doing some good things may be expected to play some valuable minutes for the Tide?
Yeah, summer workouts are an important time. There's no pads or anything, but with some of these position battles, I think it's important for these guys to continue to gain experience, to develop, and to improve. And I posted a story this morning just looking at the secondary, because there's a lot of new guys there. And I talked to Justin Woodall, former Alabama safety, who's kind of a trainer now and has worked with some of these guys. And he talked about Jalen Key, the transfer from UAB, and he's coming in with a ton of experience. That's something that the secondary lost a lot of, with guys like Battle and Branch and Helms and Eli Ricks moving on. So to get a guy like that, I think is big. I think he can certainly help this team right away. Caleb Downs, true freshman. There really can't be enough said about him and the way that he's performed, and really his mindset, because he's come in and he's been all about his business. And I think he's someone that can certainly be a day one starter in the back end of that secondary. And then, you look at some of the guys who are returning, guys like Kool-Aid, Malachi Moore. They've put in a lot of work this offseason. I don't think the secondary, is as much of a worry or a question mark as it was exiting the spring, because they were able to go out and get some transfers. It'd be interesting to see what happens up front on the defensive front seven. So many guys moving on, but I think the secondary showed some good things, and I've heard a lot of good things about the wide receivers switching to the other side of the ball. And I know that they spent some time with Jalen Milroe in Tampa during May when they were off, but it sounds like a lot of these guys have, they don't like what was said about last year because it was a drop off at the receiver position. I don't think anybody's arguing that, but I think guys like Ja'Cory Brooks and Isaiah Bond, Kendrick Law, Blake Benson, the new guy coming in, I think they've all kind of attacked this off season and want to be better at that position and prove that they're one of the best receiving corps in the SEC. So, it's tough to kind of gauge some of the big fellas because, again, there's no pads in the summer, but the guys on the back end and split out wide, I think they've been putting in some good work.
Charlie, I got a two-part question for you. First, how do you see this quarterback battle playing out? Personally, I think me and my dad agree on this. We feel like Jalen Milroe has that edge, and more than likely they'll probably go with him at least at the start of things. At least he it's almost his job to lose, at least at the beginning, and then we'll see from there. So how do you see that quarterback battle playing out? Do you see it going that way, or do you see it going another way? Do you see Tyler Buckner or Ty Simpson starting at quarterback week 1? And 2, what position group do you feel like is the most critical to show improvement this season versus last season?
Yeah, I agree with you guys that looking at least right now, looking at the start of the season, that Middle Tennessee game, I think I'd be surprised if it wasn't Jalen Milroe. Obviously, there's a lot of time between now, fall camp, and that first game, but he was the guy running with the ones in the spring. He made it a point to gather his receivers and work with them. I know that kind of turned some people off because it seemed like you would get the other quarterbacks involved, but I think he took it upon himself to continue to develop that chemistry, and that's important for a guy that is not as known as a passer as he is just a freak athlete, to continue to work on that time and that chemistry with his receivers. I think that shows initiative, and that's big time to me. And I think that if Jalen can continue to just improve and be consistent, I think consistency is key for all three of these guys, but with him specifically, then he has a good shot. Now, I do like Ty Simpson. I think his ceiling is higher, and I think he's a guy that's continuing to improve. So I'm not ruling anything out, and I think they brought in Tyler Buckner for a reason, because they weren't just thoroughly pleased with what they had at the position, or at least what they showed in the spring. So I think this competition is going to continue to linger, and I think that we'll see multiple quarterbacks in that first game. But it's going to be important for them to kind of whittle down those reps, because you don't want to be splitting first-team reps between three quarterbacks. So that'll be interesting to see how it plays out. And then from a position battle standpoint, or from a position that needs to improve, the first two things I thought of when you said that were inside linebacker and offensive line. I think the offensive linemen said all the right things in the spring. They talked about wanting to be more physical and dominant up front. They need to kind of figure out that left tackle position, but I think they have enough experience and talent there to be able to get the job done. And inside linebacker, I think just, again, that physicality, generating negative plays. I think if the big guys up front can open up holes, if Jaheim Otis can be that just clogger up front, then guys like Deontay Lawson and whoever steps in beside him, have lanes to make plays. And I think there's more talent there than what we saw on the field last year. And so I think if those two positions can take that next step this offseason and be a little better this year, I think Alabama will be better off for it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought about the trenches, because I thought offensive and defensive lines had to be much better, much improved, in my opinion. We talk about the quarterbacks and the skill positions, but I thought, what, if they don't move people off the ball, they're going to have some issues if they become one-dimensional, especially offensively. Let me ask you one final question again. Our guest, Charlie Potter of Bama Online and On3 Sports, is our guest here on the Middle's Edge, and then we'll let you roll, Charlie. But when you look at the overall SEC this season, of course, Alabama fell short last year, Tennessee, LSU on the road. A lot of people thinking LSU might be the new kids on the block in the West. Next year, 2024, things are changing to the 8-game SEC schedule. Where is Bama headed to me, it's like, the standard, the moxie that we are used to seeing kind of slipped the last couple of years. Do you feel that? Do you think it's changing now with Kevin Steele coming back, with, Tommy now being the offensive coordinator, the more physical, make people quick mindset? Do you feel like that's coming back?
I think they're trying to bring it back. And I think, bringing a guy like Kevin Steele on the defensive side of the ball speaks to that. Tommy Reese, we'll see what, happens there, how that plays out. But, Kevin Steele knows the expectations of his program. And I think that's one of the reasons Nick Saban, brought him in to oversee the entire defense, is to kind of change that mindset and approach on that side of the ball. And, with Eric Wolford, being the offensive line coach, what we were just talking about, the trenches, I think if they do put their money where their mouth is and what they said in the spring, this offense will be better for it. And we'll see kind of that old school Alabama approach. Now, I don't think they're going to be, 3 yards in a cloud of dust. That's not how offenses are this year. And they have a lot of skill positions or skilled players at, receiver, running back, tight end. But I do think they want to be more balanced and be, whenever you see that 3rd and short, not to kind of question, is Alabama going to be able to pick this up? That's just kind of a guaranteed. So I think on offense, more balance, but that physicality on the offensive line and in the run game is something that they're wanting to accomplish this fall. And then defensively, it just goes back to, toughness and physicality. And while I agree that the defensive line is important, we'll see if they have that kind of war daddy up front that we've seen in the past. I do think that, the inside linebacker play, just their tone and their toughness will be important for this defense. So I think they're trending in the right direction. Again, this talking season, we haven't seen a ton of it. Spring is a sample size, and once the ball kicks off in September, we'll see if that's actually what happens. But I think that's certainly a point of emphasis and something they're trying to get back to, no doubt.
No doubt about it. Charlie Potter, Bama Online, On 3 Sports. Tell the folks how they can read those great articles that you write.
Yeah, man. Since we moved over to On 3 and joined up with guys like Andrew Bone and Clint Lamb and Joseph Facey, it's been an onslaught of content, and that's a good thing for this time of year. So we have a ton of team and recruiting news over at BOL, and we still have a promo for 6 months for $1. So if anybody wants to check us out, they can do that, and I'll share all my stuff, all their stuff, all the stuff we have coming out, which seems like an endless amount, just over on Twitter at Charlie_Potter.
Well, I got $1. I'll give a couple people. If you need to borrow $1 to subscribe, hit me up. Charlie, thank you, man. That. Good stuff, man. Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, see you. Thanks, guys.